When Elvis Presley died in 1977, he left behind more than just a crown. He left behind a vast, intricate empire valued at millions of dollars. However, his final will and testament reduced that entire fortune to just one individual, despite the fact that he had a large Memphis Mafia entourage and numerous women in his life. The truth about who truly inherited Grayson and the Presley name is a tale of familial loyalty, intense legal drama, and a covert trust that altered everything, even though everyone was vying for a piece of the king's wealth. Why did Elvis pick this individual over his own family, and to whom did he leave the key to his kingdom? Come along as we go over every detail. The timid youngster from Tupelo who had a lasting impact on music. Elvis Presley was just a young man in Tupelo, Mississippi, attempting to get by in a world that didn't offer much before he became the man that everyone wanted a piece of. The date of Elvis Aaron Presley's birth was January 8, 1935. However, he wasn't born by himself. Jesse Garin, his twin brother, arrived first but was born anyway. And like an unsaid but constant presence, that loss hung over the Presleys. In ways music that words alone couldn't describe, it brought the family closer together, particularly the relationship between Elvis and his mother Gladys. Music. Vernon Presley and Gladys Love Presley lacked safety nets. They were the type of couple who never gave up, and never stopped praying that the following week would be better than the previous one. They went to a church run by the Assembly of God, and that wasn't just a Sunday ritual for Elvis. The initial spark occurred there. There he heard more than just music. He sensed it. There was no background noise in gospel. It was powerful. Something that might make a space feel lighter even when the outside world seemed gloomy. Vernon took on whatever jobs that came his way. However, music was never sufficiently supported by money. It wasn't always about stretching. The goal was to live. The family relied on government food assistance and their neighbors. Then everything music fell apart even more in 1938. After Vernon was found guilty of falsifying a check, they lost their house. The embarrassment and instability he experienced during his 8 months in jail did not go away easily. They became accustomed to the family's narrative. Teachers viewed Elvis as an ordinary child by 1941, when he started first grade. However, Elvis's most significant moments occurred in places that were inaccessible to report cards. Elvis entered a singing competition at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show on October 3, 1945, at the age of 10. He came in fifth with his rendition of Old Shep. Even though he didn't succeed, he made an effort in public. That moment music opened something up for a shy boy. Soon afterward he acquired a guitar. It was more than just a birthday present. It was a doorway. His family and a church pastor taught him, but he mostly learned by listening to and watching music. Elvis was unable to read music. He played by ear, and there was a cost to being unique in a small setting. He was being made fun of for singing at school by 1946. Some children referred to him as trashy. They made fun of the hillbilly noise. Elvis continued. Music, if nothing else, became his breathing room. At that time he developed an obsession with a Mississippi Slim hosted radio program. Slim lined up on-air performances and taught him chord techniques. Elvis froze with stage fright the first time, but he returned the following week and performed. The Presleys relocated to Memphis, Tennessee in November 1948. It wasn't simply a simple address change either. Memphis had a richer, quicker, and louder sound. At L.C. Humes High School, Elvis enrolled. Even there he didn't match the tidy stereotype of a gifted youngster. In 8th grade he received a C in music. He was even told by a teacher that he lacked singing talent. But when it came to the one thing he could sense in his blood, Elvis was not the type of person who took a final judgment from anyone. He brought his guitar and performed a well-known song there, demonstrating his ability to sing. He remained bashful though. He wasn't strolling through the corridors in style. If music is any indication, he was bullied from time to time. Because of the obvious closeness between Gladys and Elvis, some classmates referred to him as a mama's boy. By 1950 he was practicing with his neighbor Lee Denson and interacting with brothers Johnny Burnett and Dorsey Music in casual musical circles. Not fame. There was no plan at all. Momentum was the cause. Then he also started to change externally. He started drifting down B Street, got sideburns, styled his hair, and went to Lansky Brothers to study daring fashion. He entered another silent turning phase by his senior year. At Humes's yearly performance in 1953, he sang Till I Waltz Again with You as part of his music performance. People heard him all of a sudden, then they saw. Elvis later recalled how shocking it was to go from being unheard of to being discussed practically immediately. The foundation continued to take shape behind the scenes. Music in record stores, he committed songs to memory. Hank Snow, Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb and Bob Wills were among the country singers he adored. He learned about gospel, blues and rhythm and blues from music stations such as WDIA and late-night singings. He paid great attention to musicians such as Rufus Thomas and Arthur Crudup. Each sound turned into a brick. The recording that made all the difference. By 1953's summer, Elvis was no longer well known. He was far from it. However, he was already acting as though he was unable to resist the pull any longer. He entered Memphis recording service, Sam Phillips' modest studio before Sun Records rose to fame in August. Like any other child, he paid for his time in the hopes that the walls would reveal something to him that he was unaware of. A two-sided music acetate was cut by him. On one side, I'm happy, and on the other, your heartaches start. And he would subsequently assert that it was intended as a birthday present for his mother. Or perhaps just a means of hearing his voice when it mattered. In any case, the deeper reality was hidden beneath the surface of music. There's a reason he picked that studio. Phillips had no intention of pursuing polished voices. Impact was his goal. Elvis was also surreptitiously seeking a listener for what he hadn't yet musically proven. Elvis returned and cut a second acetate in January 1954. I will never obstruct you. And without you, music wouldn't be the same. However, nothing occurred once more. He repeatedly tried to open doors that would not open. Failed a tryout for the Songfellows, a local quartet. Failed a second time with the band of Eddie Bond. And if he had been the type to interpret rejection as a sign, it might have ended there. Sam Phillips, however, was also looking. Additionally, he was looking for more than one singer. He was looking for someone who could bring black music's unadulterated power to a wider audience without sugarcoating its edges. Someone who could inhabit that area organically, without seeming like a tourist or an impersonator. Then he was given a demo of a song called Without You, which Phillips believed would fit Elvis. Elvis was unable to fully perform the song when he arrived. Not yet, not in the manner Phillips desired. Beneath the struggle, however, Phillips perceived something that sounded music genuine rather than trained. And it was sufficient. He listened intently, asked Elvis to try other songs, and then made a move that altered the course of events. He scheduled a session with two local musicians, upright bassist Bill Black and guitarist Scotty Moore. The three of them worked non-stop on the evening of July 5, 1954. But to no avail. The takes were poor and the night dragged. The room's atmosphere grew drained. As if it were about to collapse into yet another dead end. Elvis then did something that didn't seem planned just as they were ready to give up. He began by playing That's All Right, a blues song by Arthur Crudup. He also sang it carelessly. He jumped all over it, attacking it as if the pressure had finally dropped. And the actual individual emerged. Later, Scotty recalled how abrupt it was, how Scotty joined in on Bill's foolish behavior after he grabbed the bass. And that's when it became a collision instead of a session. Sam Phillips made a snap decision. This was the sound he had been waiting for. So he began taping right away. When That's All Right was played on Memphis DJ Dewey Phillips' show 3 days later, the reaction was overwhelming. The phone sprang to life. The audience was curious about the singer's identity. After playing it repeatedly, Dewey asked Elvis where he attended high school when he appeared on the show. Because so many callers thought the voice belonged to a black artist, not for small talk. Still a teenager, Elvis found himself in an uncontrollable moment as he watched a city respond to him as though he were already something new. Phillips added the slapback echo that gave the records the impression that they had space and music heat surrounding them, and the trio cut Blue Moon of Kentucky within days, turning a bluegrass song into something sharper and stranger. Blue Moon of Kentucky and That's All Right on the aside music were featured on the single. The experiment was then abruptly released. The stage then appeared. On July 17, 1954, they gave their first successful public performance at the Bon Air Club. Shortly after, Slim Whitman headlined their performance at Music Overton Park Shell. The legend literally began to grow legs at this point. Elvis started making the unsteady rhythmic motion that people would later refer to as rubber legs. A combination of nerves, rhythm, and an inexplicable force. And it hit the parched grass like a spark. The movement was amplified by his wide-cut trousers. Young ladies then began to shout. Their bodies knew the future, not because they understood music. DJ promoter Bob Neal took over as manager after Moore and Black quit their previous band to ride with him full-time. They worked non-stop from August to October. Particularly at Memphis's Eagle's Nest, where teens flocked in as soon as Elvis began and vanished when the house band came back. Like only when he was on stage did the entire building matter. He also became steadier, more confident and more assured of his ability to hold a room with each performance. But he was not welcomed everywhere. When he appeared on the Grand Ole Opry on Music October 2nd, the reception was courteous but unfriendly. He wasn't horrible, the manager acknowledged, but he didn't fit. Not fitting meant he was turning into something the old Gates couldn't control, so it was both a warning and a compliment. Then in November he performed on Louisiana Hayride, the Opry's wilder, more daring rival that was aired on almost 200 stations in 28 states. He was anxious when he performed his first set, and the response was subdued. He was sharper, louder, and more like himself by the second set though, and the audience changed their minds. He committed to a full year of Saturday night appearances with the show. All of a sudden he was more than just a Memphis sensation. He was passing through new stages, towns, and rooms that still hadn't chosen a name for him. Due to his touring hayride publicity and consistent record sales, Elvis became a regional superstar by the beginning of 1955. A growing number of sides attributed to Scotty Bill and Elvis Presley were released by Sun. Additionally, the sound baffled radio listeners since it wouldn't sit nicely in a single box. For country stations, too R&B. Too rustic for R&B stations. Elvis was given nicknames that attempted and failed to control him, and that blend was given the moniker Rockyily. The business titan behind the scenes. Colonel Tom Parker, who was constantly on the lookout for the next big thing, began moving pieces after Bob Neal introduced him to Elvis. Parker Music became Neal's special advisor, and Elvis extended Neal's contract. It wasn't always safe because of the intense reaction on the road. Neal would later acknowledge that it could be frightening, particularly when police had to stand nearby and envious teenage boys turned their obsession into anger music. At a country disc jockey music convention in early November, Elvis was chosen as the year's most promising male performer. And in a matter of weeks, the major labels arrived with substantial funds. Parker and Phillips sold Elvis Presley's son's contract to RCA Victor on November 21st for an unprecedented music $40,000. Since Elvis was only 20, he was still considered a minor by law, so his father signed. The final silent chapter of Elvis Presley's career as a struggling kid attempting to make a name for himself ended without a ceremony, as RCA started to press him hard, reissuing Sun recordings and laying the groundwork for a nationwide takeover. Because the question of whether Elvis would survive was no longer the focus of the story after that contract ink dried. And after he did, it began to focus on what the rest of the world would do. How Elvis became the talk of the country. Elvis was no longer a regional sensation by January 10, 1956. Music RCA Victor was prepared to profit from his status as a national gamble. His first RCA recordings were made that day when he entered a Nashville studio with Floyd Kramer joining Scotty Moore, Bill Black, and DJ Fontana. In order to give Elvis a larger frame without lessening the edge that people were beginning to fear, RCA also brought in guitarist Chad Atkins and background singers including Gordon Stoker from the Jordanaires. Heartbreak Hotel was the music that came out of that session, and it didn't feel like a courteous introduction when it was released as a single on January 27. It had the sound of a warning siren. Parker also acted quickly, securing 6 appearances on CBS stage show in 2 months, which forced Elvis into living rooms all over the nation. America had to deal with him up close, which was inevitable and immediately polarizing. Elvis continued to record more songs in New York after his initial appearance, expanding his repertoire. When I Forgot to Remember to Forget peaked at number 1 on Billboard's country chart in February, the momentum continued to build. At this point, Elvis was going beyond what was appropriate behavior. He was being claimed by the country. No one had figured out how to file him away, and pop was staring. His debut album was then released by RCA in March, and it was a huge hit. It combined country, pop, and R&B in an unpermitted way, assembling new recordings and unreleased Sun tracks. The album's message was evident as it soared to the top of the Billboard music chart and remained there for 10 weeks. There was no phase to this. A takeover occurred here. Subsequently, television transformed that music takeover into a national conflict. When Elvis performed on the deck of the USS Hancock in San Diego on April 3 for NBC's The Milton Berle Show, the response was swift. Screams, cheers, and bodies moving as if they were unable to stop themselves. A few days later, an engine failure over Arkansas almost killed a plane headed for Nashville. The sort of thing that ought to have made people stop. Elvis, however, didn't stop. Heartbreak Hotel peaked at number 1 on the pop chart 12 weeks after its release, and by the end of April he was performing live in Las Vegas at the New Frontier Hotel and Casino. He wasn't welcomed in Vegas. The older, more traditional and unimpressed audience reacted as though he had interrupted an uninvited party. Elvis didn't fold. He expanded the scheme. There were already aspirations to become an actor. He also committed to a 7-year deal with Paramount Pictures during that Vegas stint, fully entering the Hollywood pipeline. He made a rigorous 15-city, 15-day tour in mid-May, and a song caught on to him like fate somewhere in that grind. He had seen Freddie Bell and the Bellboys perform Big Mama Thornton's hit song Hound Dog, which Elvis transformed into his own farewell song, not as a cover but as a weapon, and the weapon music triggered alarms. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover received an urgent message alerting him to Elvis's danger following a performance in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was performing music for teenagers in a room, not because he was breaking the law. Not only were the adults afraid of music, they were afraid of becoming unruly. When Elvis made a comeback to the Milton Berle Show in Hollywood on June 5, that fear erupted. He was persuaded by Early to put his guitar backstage. Additionally, Elvis had nothing to conceal himself behind without it. He made one performance into a national debate by slowing down Hound Dog and leaning into the movement. He was attacked by critics, made fun of in headlines, deemed unfit for family viewing by Ed Sullivan, and was sneered at by the moniker Elvis the Pelvis. He was not, however, diminished by the criticism. He became more well-known as a result, since controversy still attracts attention. Parker was able to sell oxygen and attention. The narrative then took a depressing turn once more. Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas on March 24, 1958, and his arrival was covered by the media. As if they could decipher America by seeing him get off a bus, crowds pressed in. Elvis maintained that he desired to be treated just like everyone else. In actuality, though, he couldn't be. No longer. Even in uniform, the music continued while he was training at Fort Hood. He recorded songs in Nashville during a brief vacation in early June to demonstrate that the soldier chapter wouldn't destroy the performer. Then he took the blow that truly transformed him. Gladys Presley was diagnosed with hepatitis in early August, and her illness quickly deteriorated. Elvis returned home on emergency leave, reached Memphis on August 12, and music passed away from heart failure 2 days later at the age of 46. Elvis was heartbroken. He had lost the connection that had held him together, and the loss left a silent wound that persisted. The routine solidified by October 1, 1958, when he was assigned to Ray Barracks in West Germany. New habits were formed and promotions came. Amphetamines were introduced to him. He met Priscilla Bolu in Bad Nime, Germany as well. She was 14 years old. He was 24. Years passed during the courtship, and because fame doesn't stop time, the detail continues to loom large over the narrative. It distorts music and draws everyone in close enough to make decisions that stick. It wasn't a quiet welcome when Elvis returned to the United States in March 1960 and was released a few days later. Fans crowded the train, demanding a piece of him as if he were a member of the general public. As if the world had been holding its music breath, he returned to RCA's Nashville studio in a matter of weeks, cutting Stuck on You, Rushed Out, and reaching #1. It's Now or Never, and Are You Lonesome Tonight followed shortly after. His ability to soften a room without losing control was demonstrated by his ballads. Additionally, his personal life progressed toward the moment set in motion overseas, while the general public watched the machine continue to run. Elvis proposed to Priscilla in 1966, just before Christmas. They were married in a short ceremony in their suite at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas on May 1, 1967. Elvis had already lived multiple lives in a single decade by that point. The soldier, the movie star, the rebel, the main antagonist, and the music gospel singer. The residences, vehicles, jet, music, and crown cost inside Elvis Presley's empire. Elvis Presley left behind more than just a modest bank account and a few mementos when he passed away in 1977 at the age of 42. He allegedly left behind an empire valued at $5 million at the time, or about $20 million in modern currency. When he was just 22 years old, Elvis purchased Graceland Music in 1957 for just over $100,000. When Elvis arrived on June 26, 1957, while he was busy filming Jailhouse Rock, his parents, Vernon and Gladys, put down $1,000, moved in first, and stayed for more than a month. However, Graceland had a rich history before Elvis ever set foot on the gate. Prior to the Presleys, the SC family owned a 500-acre farm that included the land. It feels almost too ideal now, as if the place was always waiting for music to claim it. The name Grace, and was inspired by a relative named Grace. Ruth Brown Moore, Grace's niece, and her husband, music doctor Thomas Moore, constructed the mansion in 1939. The house wasn't as quiet as one might think of old Southern mansions, and their daughter Ruth Marie played harp for the Memphis Symphony Orchestra. In an odd way, the early musical recitals that took place in the front rooms predicted what Graceland would eventually become. The orbit of a single star attracts people and creates rooms full of energy and sound. Graceland was 10,266 square feet when Elvis purchased it. Grand and impressive already. Elvis didn't purchase it to keep it frozen though. He purchased it in order to shape it into his own reality. As the legend grew, the property's size increased over time, surpassing 17,000 square feet, making it a living statement. This is the king's residence. He purchased the property in 1957, the same year the renowned gates with musical notes arrived. The kidney-shaped pool was also added that year, not only for luxury but also for the type of music lifestyle he was creating. One of the most talked about rooms in the entire mansion was added by Elvis in 1965. Everyone would refer to the enclosed den that was connected to the kitchen as the Jungle Room. As his fame grew, Graceland began to feel more like a private kingdom with its own set of laws rather than merely a place to live. And it wasn't just walls that Elvis used to construct that kingdom. Using motion, music machines, and objects that followed him like characters in his story, he created it. Beginning with the vehicles that signaled his approach before he even left. Elvis purchased his first Cadillac, a 1954 Fleetwood Series 60 in pink, at the beginning of 1955. It was more than just a means of transit. It was a rolling declaration that the days of being a broke music kid were coming to an end. Elvis and the Blue Moon Boys were carried by that. It was short-lived though. On June 5, 1955, a roadside fire between Hope and Texarkana, Arkansas, destroyed it after a brake lining failed. It was as though his new life's first chapter literally caught fire. On July 5, 1955, a month later, he purchased a second Cadillac Fleetwood Series 60, this one blue with a black roof. Elvis, however, was unable to ignore it. A pink Cadillac was mentioned by him in Baby Let's Play House. The image began to stick after that song rose to the top of the national charts. Therefore, he had the car repainted in a custom pink shade called Elvis Rose, created by a neighbor on Lamar Street while keeping the roof black. And after music was completed, Elvis did something that makes it clear who was most important to him at that time in his life. Gladys, his mother, received it from him. Elvis continued to drive it most of the time, frequently with the band, even though Gladys didn't even have a driver's license. However, the gesture had nothing to do with usefulness. It was about devotion and ensuring that the person who supported him during the difficult years could experience the new one's brilliance. That Cadillac sustained its own injuries, such as when Scotty Moore collided with another car in Texarkana, Texas, resulting in $1,000 worth of damage. However, it remained in the Presley narrative, changing along with Elvis. In 1956, he gave the car another makeover after signing with RCA in November 1955. He painted the roof white and redecorated the upholstery. He loaned the vehicle to his Army friend Joe Esposito upon his return from service in 1960 because by that time, Elvis had new tastes, new rides, and new iterations of the same concept. And that original pink Cadillac is still on display at Grace and today, serving as evidence as well as a vehicle. Evidence that Elvis didn't sing only about his dreams. He purchased them, altered them, and made them legendary. However, as the empire grew, even automobiles were insufficient. Elvis paid $899.72 for his most famous airplane, a Convair 880, in 1975. He then spent hundreds of thousands more to make it into something that only Elvis would consider completed. The renovations were a breathtaking sight. Suede chairs, gold-plated seatbelts, and 24-karat gold-flecked sinks for music. Because luxury wasn't an afterthought for Elvis. Even when music took place in a cabin at 30,000 feet, it was still a part of the stage. He gave the aircraft his daughter Lisa Marie's name. Hound Dog 1 was its radio code name. And by the middle of the 1970s, his use of it revealed everything about the society he was living in. Elvis hardly ever took day trips. At 2 in the morning, he could decide he wanted to take off by calling his flight music crew. To visit a restaurant that served his favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, he could take a plane from Memphis to Denver. He even took his dog to a veterinary clinic using the jet. Together with his smaller Lockheed Jetstar Hound Dog 2, that Convair is still on display at Grace and today. One person received the fortune that Elvis Presley left him. You'll never guess who it is. The world assumed that Elvis Presley's estate would be split among his friends and family when he passed away in 1977. However, that did not occur. Rather, Lisa Marie Presley, his daughter, became the center of the Presley empire. And this is what music does to make that choice more painful. The empire only appeared wealthy when Elvis passed away at the age of 42. It was bleeding behind the curtain. Elvis had an estimated net worth of $5 million, but he owed a lot of money, and the IRS was still chasing him. The crown jewel fans' sacred ground, Graceland, was suddenly in jeopardy. The estate was drowning in taxes, maintenance, and years of money handled improperly, not because Elvis didn't love it. The narrative then shifts from Elvis alone to the survivors who are left standing in the wreckage. Because reality struck quickly after the funeral. Maintaining Graceland was not sentimental. It was cruel. The cost of the property was high, there was immediate pressure to sell. The music message was spread by everyone in the estate. Pay out. Reduce losses. Proceed. They maintained that Elvis would soon be forgotten by the world. Priscilla Presley, however, declined. She wasn't merely guarding a home, she was defending the final tangible work of Elvis that was unremixable and unrewritten. She subsequently acknowledged that she was fighting alone in that battle, with voices urging her to sell before the debt ate up everything. Rather, Priscilla got her hands dirty and devised a non-emotional plan. Graceland could not remain a private residence if it was to endure. It had to turn into a company. Thus, Graceland became a museum in 1982, 5 years after Elvis's passing. All of that changed with that one choice: music. A financial engine replaced what had been a financial anchor. Elvis's music was no longer the only thing that fans wanted. His world was what they desired. They desired to feel his presence, see his rooms, and stroll through his hallways. Graceland became the place where devotion became money and sorrow became music business. The property music didn't simply endure over time, it developed into a whole operation. Smart deals in music, publishing, licensing, merchandising, and branding. Elvis ceased to be just a vocalist. He turned into a business. Music. It's also easy to overlook how enormous he was in his lifetime. Around the world he sold hundreds of millions of records. He demanded huge performance fees when he was at his best. Even when critics rolled their eyes, he continued to make his name known by starring in 31 films between 1956 and 1969. Tragically though, the money never lived up to the hype. Elvis led an opulent life, jets, cars, houses, and a never-ending entourage. Because fame kept whispering that it would last forever, the spending never slowed. His way of life was music costly. His kindness came at a high cost. Additionally, the further he went, the more his finances were entangled in choices that were outside of his complete control, such as how Colonel Tom Parker handled him. Then came Priscilla's divorce, which was accompanied by emotional and financial consequences. Therefore, the estate wasn't a tidy treasure trove when Elvis passed away. The house of cards was intricate. However, one thing was evident from Elvis's will. Although it wouldn't be in her hands right away, Lisa Marie would carry on the Presley legacy. Even though she was still a minor, everything was transferred into a trust in her name, which waited until she was an adult. Whether the world liked it or not, she became the focal point of the legacy because of that structure. Ultimately, Elvis did not abandon his empire to his pals. He let his child handle it. How do you feel about Elvis's ultimate choice? Please let us know what you think in the comments section below. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Click the following video that appears on your screen as well, you'll like it.